Prayers.
Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou wouldest be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, and the safety, honor, and welfare of all people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, as we forgive our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honour.
I should like to inform the honourable members that I have excuses of absence for His Honour, the Most Honourable Reginald Farley, President of the Senate, Senator, the Most Honourable Dr. Jerome Walcott, and Senator Patricia Paris. Minutes of the meeting held on 5th February 2025 are to be confirmed.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move the confirmation of the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, the 5th of February 2025.
All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. Minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, 23rd April 2025.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, the 23rd of April 2025 be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of the meeting held on Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025 be now deferred. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers. Report from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sitting of the Senate and moved by a minister. Introduction of bills. No suspensions. Introduction of bills. Public business.
Are they moving the order?
Public business is in order today.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 7, Madam Deputy President.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 7, Madam President. President, to move the second read in the name of the Honourable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Seaport Industry Management, Operation and Development Bill 2025.
Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy President. As I rise to introduce this bill, I am sure that all honourable senators would recall that we have come to this place on several occasions over the last few years, to deal with a number of pieces of maritime legislation. And these pieces of legislation have really been driven in large part by two principal things. One, the position and the policy of the government of Barbados as at 2018 to invest heavily in the development of our maritime sector. I believe we have heard on more than one occasion that Barbados has 400 times our land space in our marine space. And so the investment in a marine industry or a maritime industry has been a part of the government's policy position. But Mr. President, in 2018, when this government came to office, as a consequence of the work of the International Maritime Organization, there was an audit. There was an audit in 2018, and it found that Barbados, in over 70% of the areas covered in the audit, would have failed an IMO audit. And so coming out of the policy of the government of Barbados to invest in the maritime sector, a decision was made to systematically, section by section, item by item, issue by issue, to invest in ensuring that Barbados will never again find itself in a position where a maritime audit conducted by the International Maritime Organization or by our own standards, which have needed to be raised over time, that we would never find ourselves in that position again. And so the work began. Many of us, if not all of us here, would recall that in 2018 we started out with a ministry with responsibility for the blue economy and maritime affairs. We subsequently moved on in 2022, Madam Deputy President, to have a ministry that took responsibility for the blue and the green economy. And so the work has continued. Specifically though, on the maritime sector, I come at this from the perspective, Madam Deputy President, of being a chairman of the Bridgetown Port in 2018 when that maritime audit was an issue, when the policy coming from the Ministry of Blue Economy was being developed, and you will see reference to a national maritime policy emerging out of that leadership at the time of the ministry with responsibility for the blue economy. And then I come at this again, Madam Deputy President, and I'm going to say that a couple of times because it's just habitual now when you're standing in this space. But we acknowledge that we have Her Honor with us presiding in the absence overseas on travel of our Honourable President. And so, Madam Deputy, we had at the time to do a considerable amount of work. I remember myself traveling with the representatives of the Bridgetown Port to London to attend meetings with the International Maritime Organization to be able to rationalize how Barbados could attain the necessary standards with the technical assistance support of the IMO. And so off to the races we went under the leadership of the Ministry of the Blue Economy, and we commenced the work under the leadership then of the Minister. Now, international transport, even though it falls largely under the Ministry of International Transport and the work of the IMO, has fallen under the Ministry of International Transport, which meant that at the time in 2018, it went from the ministry with responsibility for the blue economy, and it then went in 2020 to the ministry with responsibility for tourism and international transport, and in 2022, tourism and international transport. And so the work has been a continuum that has seen us coming to this chamber over the years with a suite of legislation. And as I begin to go through the legislation, Madam Deputy President, I want to laud the officer who has journeyed through all of those phases that I have just described, and who herself is here in Barbados, a maritime lawyer. That is her specialization. When I first met this young woman in, I believe, 2017, even before we were in office, she had just come back from overseas. At the time, she had just completed her law degree. She had come back from finishing her master's, Madam Deputy President, and she had also spent time in Malta at the International Maritime Organization Academy for Maritime Law. And this single-handed work of this young woman, along with a small team, because really single-handedly, she has ushered us through the period of blue economy, to tourism and international transport, to where we are with every single piece of maritime legislation that has graced this chamber. Every single piece of legislation. And they're not small pieces of legislation, Madam Deputy President. There are pieces of legislation, I believe the last one that was done as a cognate debate last Thursday was over 300 odd pages. The one that is before us today, we're talking also about the sustainable fisheries legislation that was dealt with last week. We have hundreds of pages of legislation, and this young woman, and I want to ask your permission to call her name. I have done so every time I have introduced the legislation in this particular discipline, and I want to ask your permission to recognize Miss Najla King, who is the Director of Maritime Affairs. In my own ministry, oftentimes I say, and anytime that I am speaking in a public forum, I make the effort, Madam Deputy President, to recognize the officers in my team, because oftentimes the public sees the face of the ministry, who is oftentimes the minister, but they don't see all of the persons who put in a lot of the technical work, and we don't always give them the kind of credit and visibility that they deserve. And I want to make sure that we practice that. And so Najla King is a name that Barbados must always remember when talking about maritime affairs and maritime law. So we are benefiting today from a new piece of legislation. It's called the Seaport Industry Management Operations and Development Bill of 2025. This piece of legislation, Madam Deputy President, is going to cover a range of things, and I want to collide with the legislation very early in my presentation. It has a number of parts. It has it has 13 parts. And in those 13 parts, it covers the following things. It goes through what is the administrative framework of the seaport, what are the powers that are assigned to the entity that is considered a seaport, and I'll come back to that in a minute. In part 3, it covers the National Seaport Industry Sustainability Program, and I will come back to that in a minute. In part 4, it covers the activities requiring licenses, permits, or other instruments. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one today. But in part 5, it goes on to speak about the seaport industry research and development. That's in part 5. I am going to spend a moment on that. Port arrangements is at part 6. And then it goes into speaking under the same part 6 on some of the elements that I'm also going to raise today, specifically home porting, provisioning, its relationship with other sectors, and the elements on stevedoring. Then, Madam Deputy President, I'm going to come to part 7, where I want to spend a significant amount of my time today. Part 7 of the legislation speaks about transshipment and port-centric logistics, and it talks about what is to be developed there. Part 8, where I am going to spend some time, it talks about seaport clearances, because there we're talking about goods. In a country, Madam Deputy President, where 90% of all goods that we consume comes through a seaport, this is an important section of this legislation. It goes on in Part 9 to speak about unclaimed goods or unpaid fees. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Part 10, responsible supply chain management and minerals and precious metals. I'm not going to camp out there too long, but suffice to say that just last week, in this section here, it talks about things like how the section is to be implemented, and then at section 58 on Part 10, it talks about ocean minerals, precious metals supply chain, and the management code. And then it talks about a range of things, including fair trade and fair mind standard. And so I'm not going to spend any time there because in a lot of instances, that's not necessarily applicable to Barbados or even to this region, so much so. However, there is a global conversation, as you know better than most, which is underway around deep seabed mining and how you're treating to the minerals that are beneath the seabed. But more importantly, in the renewable energy sector, just last week, I was at a meeting, and the title of the meeting was The Future of Energy Security. It was hosted by the International Energy Agency in partnership with the United Kingdom. And in that discussion, they were speaking extensively about the need to have continuous access to the minerals and the rare earth minerals used to procure energy goods and to manufacture energy goods. And so this is an important global part of the conversation, even if not specifically important in a Barbadian context. Offenses and penalties in Part 13, a number of miscellaneous components in Part 13, Part 12 and 13, and then it has a series of schedules. It has 6 schedules in total, which outline both the administrative arrangements, the structure of the Seaport Research and Development Committee, and the various forms and declaration forms that are necessary. So let me get into the substance of the presentation, having gone through the various sections of the legislation for reference. Madam Deputy President, a few weeks ago we were in retreat. Senator Monroe Knight was there. I believe you were there, Madam Deputy President. And in the opening comments of the Honourable Minister who spoke at the launch of that retreat, we were speaking about missions, there were a number of things that that minister said that stood out for me. And I want to reference those comments here in my presentation to frame my introduction of the substance of this bill. They said Barbados is in summary, I'm paraphrasing here, Madam Deputy President, I'm paraphrasing because we want to get into the meat of the matter. But in summary, the Honourable Minister who spoke said this: there would have been no contemplation that we would have been the government to be leading a country at such a time as this. There would have been no contemplation that we would have been the government leading a country in an era of global instability almost continuously. There was no contemplation, certainly, of anything that came between 2018 and now. And just when you thought that you were settling, the world is perhaps more unstable now than it had been in the last several years. So what is it about leadership, visioning, and how those things translate into policy that makes us the government that is now leading in this environment? When in 2018 we started the maritime shipping policy, there was no contemplation outside of an aspirational goal for Barbados to use its logistical location, its geographical location, to develop into a logistics hub. When we started to have a national shipping policy, there was no contemplation except the fact that we needed to diversify our market base for where we were going to be procuring our goods from different traders in terms of exporters. When Barbados started to establish the logistics hub, for example, in Lears in St. Michael, just up there off of Canewood, there was no contemplation about the inability to access certain goods from different countries and what increases in tariffs would have resulted in, and how diversification from different markets would have become even more critical. None of those things would have been contemplated. But the importance of visioning and a high level of ambition as to where this country needed to position itself has meant that in 2025, Barbados is further along the trajectory than we could have been had we not had that high level of visioning. The creation and the establishment of Barbados as a logistics hub is a critical component captured in this legislation as at 2025, on the last day of April 2025, but it is even more critical Madam Deputy President, in an environment of geopolitical instability and challenges with where our goods are going to come from in different parts of the world. That is what leadership and vision is going to position Barbados to put Barbados in a position where in many instances we can't overcome all of the challenges that we're going to find. We're never going to be able to preempt all of the challenges that we're going to encounter, but certainly by setting a high level of ambition and an expansive vision for where Barbados as a country can be, it helps us to be in front of the curve in many ways as we are now navigating. In this legislation, Madam Deputy President, it speaks about a couple of things, and I want to go forward and come back. In Part 8, for example, the sections in there, for the sections 47, 48, 49, and 50, speak in summary about pre-clearance. Madam Deputy President, in 2019, Barbados introduced Assecuda World. September 2019, Barbados introduced Assecuda World to be able to introduce exactly what is now captured in this April 2025 legislation. Yes, there are elements relating to clearance and pre-clearance captured in the Customs Act, which we have passed in this Honourable Chamber already, but this is what is contemplated. But we go further. September 2019, we saw Assecuda. By the end of 2019, we also saw the Bridgetown Port, which a lot of this act relates to, introduce something called the Port Community System. And I say that without any question, because I remember being the chairman who would have presided over its implementation. And why did we introduce a Port Community System? Because on the agenda, down the way, was the Maritime Single Window, which we have passed the legislation effecting in this Honourable Chamber in only the last 2 years. So we have the Maritime Single Window, the Electronic Single Window, which is a project that has spanned, I believe, since the Honourable Prime Minister was Minister of Economic Affairs and Development somewhere back in a previous life. And this project, along with the Maritime Single Window, along with the Assecuda World System, needed to have coherence. And there needed to be a single platform that allowed all of the various single windows to speak to themselves. So Assecuda World is a customs platform. It focuses on customs clearance. Maritime Single Window is a ships clearance platform, and it focuses on ships. The Electronic Single Window, which sits under my ministry, is also a pre-clearance platform, but it specifically focuses on things relating to export and import certificates. And the Port Community System is meant to house it all. And so, Madam Deputy President, where we are now is in a position where we are creating an entire framework that captures the ecosystem, and I'm going to use that word repeatedly for a reason. When people say the Bridgetown Port, the port, they think it's just the structure there. The gates, gate 1, gate 2, the north gate, the south gate, shed 1, shed 2, is the place that they go to clear barrels. But the port is an ecosystem. The Bridgetown Port is an ecosystem. And I want people to understand that the ecosystem that is the Bridgetown Port is what is now in contention in all of these pieces of legislation. The Bridgetown Port includes customs. Customs covers Assecuda. The Bridgetown Port includes what we call the other government agencies: health, port health, agriculture, veterinary, plant. It includes commerce for import certificates. It includes police. And so all of the various agencies that function within the Bridgetown Port have a regulatory responsibility. And when we come to, therefore, Part 8 in this legislation, and we connect it with the other pieces of legislation, like the Customs Act, we are speaking about putting all of those agencies that constitute the ecosystem into a single online platform, which would allow for the goods to be cleared, all of the agencies to have the various touch points that are necessary, risk management strategies to be used, so that Barbadians and Barbadian importers are able to have faster clearances of goods through the Bridgetown Port. And so Section 8 is important because of that work. Under the Electronic Single Window in my ministry, which I can talk about, we have a couple of things. In November of 2024, we figured, well, we don't trade with ourselves, so doing it by ourselves with just us in the ministry is pointless. And so together with Export Barbados, we then made a request to have a presentation to COTED. COTED is the Council on Trade and Economic Development of the CARICOM Secretariat. And coming out of that presentation, we are now at the end of completing a pilot where 12 member states of the CARICOM region have now come on board the Barbados pilot and are engaging in exchanging export certificates in goods that are moving throughout the region using the electronic single window that Barbados has developed. We are now in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, covering 23% of all transactions. Jamaica, St. Lucia, Guyana, we have 38% of all transactions covered. And other countries that are involved in the pilot, accounting for 39% of all transactions, are the following: Anguilla, St. Vincent, Belize, Dominica, Suriname, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Antigua and Barbuda. So we have 12 countries that are engaging in the utilization of the pilot for export certificates under the electronic single window. This is what we're talking about, Madam Deputy President, when I say that projects that were long started and are now well advanced in its implementation and finally coming to fruition were as a result of visionary leadership, a commitment to implementation, and now we are in a position to say, having passed or having now considered this legislation today and hopefully pass it later on today, that we are well advanced with the implementation of many of the provisions captured in this legislation. I want to then go, Madam Deputy President, I'm going to come backwards to Part 6 of the legislation. In Part 6 of the legislation, which talks about port arrangements, what is contained in port arrangements? I've already established that the port is an ecosystem. There are multiple agencies functioning within the port, and using the technology and pulling all of those agencies into the technology is critical to create efficiency. But who are we trading with? I've talked about what we're doing with the electronic single window and countries in the Caribbean. But beyond the Caribbean, the legislation here at Section 33 speaks about the entry into sister and friendship port agreements. While I was in the Bridgetown port, we forged a bilateral relationship and sister port agreements with two entities. One, Port of Dubai, and the Port of Kenya, the major port in Kenya. So two countries we had sister port arrangements with. And the intention there is to make sure that as we open up trading routes and trading relationships and diversify our supply base, that we are then in a position to take the technology and the port relationships and collaborate jointly with other entities across the globe. So sister port arrangements are covered here. What is home porting as captured at Section 34? Barbados' cruise industry in particular and our cargo industry, they function on the basis of what is called home porting. Home porting captured in this legislation speaks about when a ship that is not just coming to Barbados, it is coming to Barbados to pass through as a transit ship. It's coming to Barbados to onboard goods, to offboard goods, to function as Barbados in a logistics hub. But for cruise in particular, it is what allows us during the winter season to see all of those planes coming into Barbados, lining the tarmac, especially above gate 13, and then the buses taking them off the ship, off the plane, straight into the Bridgetown port, onto the ship. And the ship is engaging in what is important that I want to come to is captured here in this legislation in section, on the provisioning. It speaks about provisioning under Section 36. This is where the economic value of the maritime industry, specifically for both cargo and cruise vessels, becomes important, Madam Deputy President. A ship carrying 1,500 passengers is possibly also, as Senator King would know, is also carrying possibly 1,000 to 1,200, even 1,500 crew. They have to be fed, they have to be watered every single day. And we have built a relationship with the cruise lines and with the cargo lines that home porting in Barbados is the thing to do. And what does that mean? It means that the small shops are able to sell their goods onto the cruise. It means that the artisans are also able to do the same thing. The rum manufacturers are able to do that. And many people don't even realize that our water manufacturers are able to sell their water, their bottled water, onto the cruise ships. Ice cream, farmers, poultry, eggs, all of those things in small businesses are able to make a difference and to have an economic livelihood as a result of the home porting arrangements with Barbados. And so what we call the cross-pollination of sectors it is really going to be important to allow for people to have the economic benefits of these big ships that you see coming into the country. I want then to go on, Madam Deputy President, to the section that speaks about the creation of the Seaport Industry Financing and Investment and the Seaport Industry Fund and the research and development. The maritime sector, certainly if I were to connect it with the energy sector, is one of the sectors that has been investing very heavily in decarbonization initiatives, ensuring that you're able to reduce the impact on the environment as a result of ships moving across the ocean from place to place. And so the investment in innovation and research and development is a critical part of that, and this legislation covers it. It also covers, Madam Deputy President, in Section 8, on the transshipment and port-centric logistics, the establishment of Barbados' transshipment and port-centric logistics program. What is that? Madam Deputy President, when you go to places like Rotterdam, Kingston Wharves, many of those major ports globally, everything around the port is related to what is called port-side activity. Port-side activity. If you need to be a part of the import-export trade, chances are you are adjacent to where the seaport is based. And so that reduces the transport costs, it reduces the logistics costs, but it also makes for efficiencies in clearances. And so in the Bridgetown area, around the Bridgetown port area, you will see a number of businesses that are hubbed in that space because you want to make sure that import-export is being facilitated by way of proximity. It would make no sense, Madam Deputy President, for you to be clearing 20-foot, 40-foot containers and you have a facility in the port, but you are having a clearance facility in St. Andrew. Because the logistics and the transport challenges that will come about as a consequence of that will make it prohibitively expensive and also take time, and time, as we know, is money. So it is the ambition of this government to see the Bridgetown port develop and its environs as a logistics hub that focuses on trade logistics and allows for the global community to see Barbados as a logistics hub. You've heard the Honourable Prime Minister speaking about the transatlantic slave trade. And in speaking about the transatlantic slave trade, she's talked about reversing the Middle Passage, using the Middle Passage in a modern context for good, as opposed to what was done in our historical colonial context, where we use the Middle Passage and Barbados' geographical location to service the needs of countries in the north and in the south as a logistics hub, using the Bridgetown port and the Grant and the Adams International Airport on a seaside. But today we're discussing maritime, and so I'm speaking about the seaport side of it today. But it does include air freight, because perishables in particular also need to have the benefit of air freight because of the speed with which you are transporting these items. And then of course with the Bridgetown port, you need to have what we call reefer containers, which are simply refrigerated containers where a significant amount of our fruit, vegetables, and meat products are able to be transported. This is what global logistics looks like. And this small country in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on one side and adjacent to the Caribbean Sea on the other side, upwinds. When we had the Seaport conference last month, one of the leaders who came, they came by private plane, and they said getting here was just 6 hours on a direct flight. When we are traveling to the African continent, Madam Deputy President, we have to go to London for 8 hours, and then we have to go from London to the African continent for 9 hours or 8 hours or 7 hours over the Atlantic, and then reverse it to be able to come back to Barbados. But the notion of being able to go directly from here in Barbados, either by sea or by air, is a conversation that Barbados has begun to have with the global logistics community. How does Barbados establish itself as a logistics hub? And does Barbados have the legislative framework, the necessary incentives, the necessary infrastructure to be able to deliver on its ambition? Because an ambition without all of the practical things that go along with it is just an ambition, it's just idle talk. And so when we talk about the Bridgetown port, that is why, and you've heard the business community, certainly I have heard in my ministry with responsibility for business, I've heard the business community expressing grave concern, especially during cruise season, because they've been having their cargo vessels having to remain offshore, there's congestion in the port and you are unable to bring cargo vessels in until cruise vessels go out. It is the reason why we started the cargo berth. It was one of the last things that we did before I left the Bridgetown port, and then we handed over to the team that is there now. But the cargo berth is now about to be completed, which will now allow Barbados to have a dedicated cargo berth for cargo ships to reduce the challenges that have been faced with congestion. And the Prime Minister herself has been leading meetings on port efficiency so that once those goods are off the ship, 20-foot or 40-foot containers or even less than a container load, once those vessels are off, once those goods are off the vessel, how do we make sure that among the various actors in the ecosystem in the Bridgetown port that we can have efficiency and a minimized cost and therefore a time of doing business? Can we clear goods in 24 hours? Can we clear goods in a day? In less than a day? What is required to get us to that point? The technology platforms that I have already spoken about are a significant part of that journey, and we're well advanced in getting there. And the investment in the cargo berth as infrastructure is a critical part of us getting there, as well as the investment in the agencies to be able to upgrade their skills. Training, as I speak, is underway with all of the government agencies in the upgrades for Asekuda World, which will be completed in January 2026, and the finalization of the electronic single window, which we are aiming for to take place later on this year. Training is underway with all of these agencies. And so the expectation is that with all of these efficiency measures, we will see a decreased paper handling and storage requirements, reduced transportation costs, lower administrative overheads, and quite frankly, less frustration with Barbadians, because people just want to be able to get their goods cleared and to get their goods cleared in a reasonable time frame. From the government standpoint, the government wants to make sure we have met all of the security requirements of the Bridgetown port and that we are in a position to clear goods safely for all, and that we're not clearing things that are declared to be one thing but are actually something else. That is one of the things that the government is interested in ensuring that happens. That is the reason why, Madam Deputy President, that as we have invested in infrastructure, the port has invested also in extensive security infrastructure to protect goods and people from things that are coming through the Bridgetown port that don't belong there. I want then to make the point as well that this legislation does not only cover the Bridgetown port, it covers any seaport facility, and we have at least 2 other private seaport facilities on island, on the western side and the northern side of the island. This legislation also covers the activities in those areas. And so I want to make it clear that they fall under the remit of the legislative frameworks governing seaports in the country. And if Barbados were to ever have another seaport, the same would apply. And so, Madam Deputy President, these are the principal things that I wanted to go through in this legislation. I did not want it to be a lengthy presentation today, because I believe that we have well covered a number of the issues that are relevant to the Bridgetown port and the seaport industry in these successive pieces of legislation. I want, however, then to just, in my final comments, to speak about the resilience agenda. Resilience is covered in this legislation, and you will see sustainability and resilience presented on multiple occasions throughout this legislation. This is critical, Madam Deputy President. As a government, this government has ensured that, especially even in this year's budgetary statements and announcements, that resilience is at the heart of all of the interventions that have been announced by this administration, Madam Deputy President. And it is important that in this legislation, resilience is also incorporated, as is sustainability. It is a reason, Madam Deputy President, that there is an entire section that speaks about not just the research, but notice relating to cruise passenger contributions to what is new, which is Barbados' maritime sector sustainability efforts. And that is captured in the 4th schedule of the legislation. There is a fund that is meant to support the sustainability efforts for the seaport industry, and we are expecting that over time we will be able to see the utilization of those resources to finance and to support the resilience and the sustainability efforts of the ministry. So you expect to see that specifically, as we've seen in part 3, under the establishment of the National Seaport Industry Sustainability Program, which will be launched under the Bridgetown port, specifically with oversight of the ministry with responsibility for international transport. This is the legislation, Madam Deputy President. This is how the legislation collides with government policy. It is how the legislation collides with work that has already been done. It is how the legislation collides with the work that is still to be done. And I've also spoken about the geopolitical environment in which this work is underway. I want to close, Madam Deputy President, my relatively brief presentation by expressing appreciation, again, not just to National on this instance, but to the team at the International Maritime Organization that has worked very closely with Barbados over the last few years, and everything that you see in here has had the benefit of the collaboration with our international partners, our regional partners, and our local stakeholders. And I want, therefore, Madam Deputy President, to commend this bill in its draft form to this honourable chamber and to beg to move that it is read a second time.
Senator Dr. Drakes.
Thank you, Madam President, for the day. I rise, and that is what I will be referring to the chair because that is the position that you hold this afternoon. Madam President has a nice ring. We are discussing, and I'll shorten the name of the bill, the Seaport Industries Bill 2025. And I believe the leader of government business did in fairly short but in-depth presentation of what is captured in the bill, its provisions, and what it seeks to do. And based on that presentation, I will say that the bill and my reading, I will say that the bill is one, comprehensive, it is extensive in nature, and wide-ranging, and covers many aspects of port development in the future and how we attend to issues of sustainability, regulation, etc. Madam President, having been notified that Senate was being called yesterday, I was not able to do a lot of homework. I see some stares, but nonetheless, I was not able to do a lot of homework on this bill in relation to speaking to the relevant stakeholders and getting their input on the bill and its...
Senator, sorry, you haven't been here for a while and you were just getting into stride, but the reality is that the Senate met last week and was adjourned to today. So the notice didn't just happen to go yesterday without honourable senators being informed. Senate was adjourned a week ago to sit today.
I thank you for that clarification, Madam President. And you are correct, I have been missing for a while. And I only saw it in my inbox, so that was my reality, and I give way to your guidance on the matter. But nonetheless, because of its wide-ranging implications, I was still unable to interface with stakeholders who this bill would affect. And that is a fair point to make. But nonetheless, I want to say that this bill is really embedded in the larger context, as the leader of government business noted, of the Barbados blue economy. That is clearly no secret. But when we ask the question, what is the Barbados Blue Economy? We have to engage with a number of policy instruments that have been engaged by the government through a number of development agencies. We had the UNDP Barbados Blue Economy Scoping Study, the initial action plan, that is one policy paper. Then we had the action plan and roadmap for implementation of the integrated blue economy policy framework. That was done by the IDB. There is also the Barbados Roof to Reefs program that speaks to blue economy activity. And then we also have pieces of policy such as the integrated coastal zone management plan that also has elements of the Barbados blue economy within it. And we are also now very much in national negotiations as it relates to the BBNJ agreement, which is the agreement on marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdictions, which has wide-ranging implications as well for the Barbados Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ. So when we talk about the Barbados blue economy, I believe, Madam President, despite having all of these policy papers and instruments, there is a local context of the average man and woman on the ground that is missing from the discussion. Because when the average Barbadian hears about the blue economy, how are they engaged with it? How are they a part of it? How are the fisher folk who are trying to get, many of them still trying to get their boats back into the water, how are they being facilitated as part of the Barbados blue economy? How does the average citizen, when all of the investment is made, how do they benefit both financially, socially, from any windfalls that come from that investment in the future as it relates to the blue economy? And I think if we can find a way to articulate that to Barbadians, it would be something that allows Barbadians to buy in to the concept of the Barbados blue economy. I stand here this afternoon saying that because there have been a number of incidences in our coastal areas that are cause for concerns for Barbadians. If we are moving in a development path, on a development pathway that is saying it is to be economically viable, ecologically sustainable, and socially just, it brings into question then, Madam President, how are we tracking the progress of the Barbados blue economy? How are we weighing the pros and cons of developmental projects, the urbanization or further urbanization of our western and southern corridors, even on the East Coast? These are questions that we have to start asking ourselves, because the relationship that Barbadians have with the coastline and beaches, not necessarily further out into offshore areas, because that's a different story, but the relationship that Barbadians have with the coastline and beaches is one that I don't think the government can take for granted when making decisions about development on our coastlines. Madam President, if you ask the question, does the Barbados blue economy take into account ensuring that there will be beach access in the future for Barbadians? It's the Seaport bill, but it is all tied. Does the Barbados blue economy ensure that there are windows to the sea in our urban corridor in the future? Does the Barbados blue economy, and bringing it right back home to an incident that happened recently, ensure that all persons who are engaged in fishing have access to vessel insurance? And what are the priority actions that we take to ensure that these fundamental principles that we outline as part of the Barbados blue economy are catered for in policy making? Because, Madam President, it is clear that we have a lot of policies on paper, but I would suggest, based on me being on the outside of things, something is not translating on the ground. And the government needs to figure out a way to make the bridge. The government needs to find a way to make the bridge. Madam President, I go even further. If we are saying that this is an area that is to bring great economic prosperity, then it also has to have a counterbalance as it relates to our ecological assets and our social development. And how are we doing that? Are we measuring the Barbados blue economy by just stating how many jobs are coming into the country by way of new hotels and the number of investment? Or do we actually know how that development is impacting the health of our coral reefs? What is the state of our seagrasses? What is the state of our mangroves? Where would we like to see the health of these large marine ecosystems in the next 10 to 15 years? Are we putting things in place like the Barbados Environmental Sustainability Fund, which is now getting off the ground, for marine conservation? But it has to be more of a concerted effort by how we measure and assess what is happening in the Barbados blue economy. The same way how anybody can pick up a central bank report and they can see how GDP, debt, all of these economic metrics are doing because of the priority, and the government itself has said the blue economy is a priority, a developmental priority. We have to decide what that national metric looks like and what we include to measure and track its success, so that if we make a decision that goes against that metric, we know what course of action to take. And at the moment, we do not have enough data and information, in my estimation, in a collated fashion, periodically enough to make evidence-based decision-making about the blue economy. Madam President, the other part of this bill speaks to regulation. And I think this is also something that plagues many organizations and agencies in government. But the extensive work that is going to be required for licenses, permits, etc., I'm also asking the question, do we have the technical capacity to handle the type of regulation that we are implementing, that will be implemented once this bill is passed this afternoon? The leader of government business made mention of the stellar work that is done by Ms. King, but these small departments are carrying a heavy load. And I don't want us to have these grand aspirations, but we do not have the resource base to implement and carry through. So that is something that I want to make a point of. The other thing is, given what is outlined in the bill, it seems as though we have many agencies operating in this space. And there may be aspects of duplication. For instance, this bill speaks to the port having the ability to designate areas for further port development. How does that align with town planning? How does that align with the integrated coastal zone management plan? Will that then also speak to the areas as it relates to what is going to be earmarked in the marine spatial plan? All of these things, Madam President, leave question marks for me because, again, as I said, I'm on the outside. So reading the legislation, these are the types of things that I put a question mark next to. Because if we are saying the port has the ability to expand and designate areas, then what is the role of town planning in that same process? Who has oversight then over that process? And I'm hoping that the government will have answers to these questions because that is the point of this exercise and debate. But, Madam President, I will ignore the asides that are trying to come in now and say that I have some questions as it relates specifically to the bill. And the leader of government business made mention of it, but I want to seek more clarity on this issue. And this is in, let me get this section, Madam President. Seaport pre-clearance, which is part 8 of the bill. If I'm seeing correctly, yes, part 8 of the bill. And I read this section and my mind went in a different direction in comparison to how the leader of government business articulated this pre-clearance. It talks about first Customs and Border Protection pre-clearance. And with your leave, Madam President, I'd like to read clause 47. It states, Customs and Border Protection pre-clearance, subject to consultation with the Minister. A memorandum of understanding or other written agreement between the government of Barbados and the government of a foreign country and the cabinet's approval of the same and collaboration with the Comptroller of Customs, Barbados Port Inc. may facilitate the stationing of Customs and Border Protection personnel of a foreign country at the port of Bridgetown or any other seaport established or managed under the auspices of the Barbados Port Inc. for the purposes specified in subsection 2. That subsection 2 states, subject to subsection 1A, Customs and Border Protection personnel of a foreign country may be stationed at the port of Bridgetown or any other seaport established or managed under the auspices of the Barbados Port Inc. to facilitate undertaking of all agriculture, customs, and immigration inspections at such seaport in Barbados. I will declare my hand. I've never engaged directly with the port activity. I read that section and it raised red flags. Because what is the arrangement where foreign officials are now managing our ports. Are stationed at the ports. Stationed at the ports. In an environment, Madam President, where we have a serious issue with crime as it relates to gun violence, this section makes me uncomfortable. I do not know if it is an existing arrangement, if it is a new arrangement, if it is a new provision in law, if it's something we've been doing for decades. Glad for the government to clarify, and I'll sit down and be fine. If it is a new arrangement, I bring light to it in this debate, given the porous nature of our ports as it relates to illegal firearms, because we don't manufacture them here. So they have to be coming in somehow. That's the consensus. And given that, and I've said this on my feet already.
Madam Chair, the Honourable Senator is inadvertently, I'm convinced, misleading the chamber, and I rise reluctantly. But Madam Chair, we have traveled, this is not, I don't want to allow the narrative about guns to be connected to this and to run down the road at all. Madam Deputy President, we travel around the globe. All of us, I believe, in this chamber know about U.S. pre-clearance, where you clear U.S. immigration in one country and you enter when you enter the United States, you don't have to clear immigration again. All of us know about global pre-check, which happens in other countries. You don't clear immigration twice. Same thing applies for customs. This has nothing to do with anything other than a global practice that exists in many countries that many of us have used, as close here as Bahamas, in Aruba, in Bermuda. It is global best practice, especially with U.S. It is all across Canada. So there's nothing that I want to allow to run down the road in the way that the Honourable Senator has just attempted to frame this.
And I thank the Leader of Government Business for the clarification. As I said, as a layman who is not involved with court activity, I read it and there was cause for concern. That is why we have the debate. That is why we are here, to engage in the legislation, ask questions, clarity is provided, and all is well. That is what we are here to do. And I thank the Leader of Government Business for providing that clarification. Madam President, that issue of pre-clearance having now been clarified, still unsettled in my mind, but having been clarified. I want to say that this piece of legislation, along with others, as rightly noted, and this is my last point, and this is less to do specifically with the legislation, but more so with the process. We had some large pieces of legislation being passed in this chamber as it relates to our maritime affairs. And we have a standing committee, I believe, that deals with environmental issues. The Sustainable Fisheries Management Act that was passed last week, I believe, where I was absent. Legislation such as this Seaport industry bill. There's another piece of legislation in the other place as it relates to marine resources, integrating marine resources. All of these pieces of legislation, in my estimation, should have gone to that standing committee. There are things in this legislation, Madam President, that I believe would warrant further eyes and interrogation. Environment. Because last week, we passed a piece of legislation that key stakeholders in the fishing industry have not had eyes on it. because they called me. So I stand here in this chamber passing a Seaport Industries bill, and I don't know what type of consultation was had. And it seems to be something that keeps coming up over and over and over again. And then once it's enacted, there is a outcry from those in the industry or those who the legislation affects. If some of the legislation, so if we have the standing committees, I believe it's for economic affairs, social development, and environment, use them so that when the legislation comes to the chamber, we know that it has been ventilated and it has been interrogated by stakeholders and their concerns, whether they're taken on board or not, are acknowledged and highlighted. And that is a fair request because the standing committees are there. That's the purpose of them. But for us to constantly get legislation that stakeholders then call you after the fact, it's been passed. What are we to do? How are they to intervene into the process? If the standing committee is there for stakeholders to intervene into the process, use the standing committees. So that the government won't feel like there are all these naysayers out there who are just trying to make the government look bad, but that's not the case. There are people who have genuine concerns with some of this legislation that we are passing. And once the legislation has been passed, it is very difficult for them to seek recourse or to intervene into the governance process to have their say. So, Madam President, I want to say that I support this Seaport Industries bill, and there are a lot of things in the process as it relates to how this upper chamber operates that I believe there is room for improvement. But I will speak on that at another time, Madam President. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a few comments on this matter, on this bill, Madam President. I would agree with the Honourable Senator Dr. Crystal Drakes that the issue of our blue economy and management of our ocean resources are extremely important, and one that requires much thought and certainly are presented, as you would have indicated, the Leader of Government Business has been presented in the suite of legislation that has been brought before this Honourable Chamber, in particular in relation to Seaport, but also, as we discussed quite extensively last week, sustainable fisheries management as well. So that this comprehensive suite of legislation, much of it started in 2019 when we had the Ministry for Blue Economy, was one that has been thought through. I also want to point out, Madam President, just a few things. So one, just in respect of the fisheries legislation that was passed. Now, of course, one cannot engage every single stakeholder as much as you would like. But I think that it would be fair to say that even the involvement of the Fisheries Association, Barnufo, and their engagement in the development of the policies and the Act. I also want to highlight the fact that it was pointed out that there was indeed extensive consultation that happened amongst fisherfolk. Again, not every single fisherfolk, unfortunately, may have been involved, but that there was extensive stakeholder consultation, that the Act, Madam President, also as well makes provision
for a number of processes for the ongoing involvement of stakeholders, that it involves the development of a plan which involves stakeholders, which will be reviewed over time by stakeholders as well. Madam President, I also want to point out to the marine spatial planning process, which I think is extremely important to this discussion, and also as well to the notion of how we find balance, as was indicated, because I think that is important. That the marine spatial plan is also an attempt to ensure that we do have that balance. It's not just about quote-unquote exploitation of the resources, not only about looking at the economic benefits of it, but also as well balancing the needs, again, of all of the constituent stakeholders to make sure that we are able then to have, again, the sustainable use of our ocean resources. If you look at the website for the Marine Spatial Plan, it is actually perhaps one of the most user-friendly websites that details the trajectory of what the government is intended to do. And you would note even the number of public consultations, Madam President, if you would allow, because I want to be very clear. And again, this is not only for those in government. It is a website that is there. It identifies very, very clearly the number of consultations on an ongoing basis, focus groups. This is the Marine Spatial Planning website, the Barbados Marine Spatial Plan website, Madam President. It identifies exactly, I can tell you, it has had 12 focus group sessions. It has had 3,284 surveys submitted. It has had 10 consultations with 191 participants. It has had educational interventions, over 940 students, 48 educators engaged. If you look at the site again, which is a public site, it identifies for you exactly where in the process we are with that marine spatial plan and with the end result, as was indicated, in order to be able to collect the data that is necessary to inform ongoing planning. So that there is a process that the government is currently undertaking through the Marine Spatial Plan to be able, one, to ensure that we have the balance, two, collect the data that is necessary to inform ongoing planning, and thirdly, and most importantly, ensure that it is developed, again, with the involvement of all of the critical stakeholders. You can also go, Madam President, on that site and look at the governance framework for that marine spatial plan, and also as well note the involvement of stakeholders and the mechanisms to ensure. So again, Madam President, the discussion, yes, around how we find the balance, the discussion around the need for data to inform concrete planning is an ongoing work. We're not suggesting that it is a finished work. There are a number of different pieces, a number of different planks, but it is an ongoing part of the agenda of government. Thank you, Madam President. I'm obliged.
Senator Cummins, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President. So I want to thank the honourable senators who have spoken. Senator Drakes raised a number of points, and I think that Senator Dr. Monroe Knight has responded very capably on the Marine Spatial Plan. I do, however, want to make the draft document outlining the objectives of the Marine Spatial Plan as a document to the House. In Senator Drakes' queries, Senator Drakes raised questions about how we treat to the collision between the blue economy and the seaport industry bills and how the blue economy work is being executed. I believe that the Marine Spatial Plan as a document to the House allows us to capture all of that. The time frame for the completion of that document is 2027. The work is underway, and when we're speaking about the underwater resources, the sea grasses and so on, one of the bodies of work being undertaken by this entity is very much the hiring of a boat which is globally accredited for the purpose, and I believe that the first run has already been completed, and there are a number of runs that are meant to be undertaken so that the spatial area has been fully mapped out. and we are then in a position to be able to undertake that comprehensive work that Senator Drakes is making reference to. So I give the assurance to the Chamber and to the country that as captured in the work of the Marine Spatial Plan, which is a part of the collaboration between the government of Barbados and the Inter-American Development Bank under the Debt for Nature swap, that the work of the blue economy being led by the ministry with responsibility for the blue and the green economy, and specifically with the Coastal Zone Management Unit as it is currently constituted, is meant to undertake this work. Now, in terms of the agencies that are responsible, you would recall that we've grown up with the CZMU, the Coastal Zone Management Unit, but in the budgetary announcements and the statements from the Honourable Minister of the Ministry of Finance, we heard that we're now moving to have invested in what used to be the Coastal Zone Management Unit, the Coastal Zone Management Authority. And so there's meant to be a dedicated agency vested with the kinds of resources that Dr. Drakes, that Senator Drakes has asked, whether or not they are available to the country, whether or not we are equiping ourselves with the manpower. That is the expectation, that a reformed, a restructured, and funded, as captured in the legislation under the Seaport legislation here that we're navigating, is meant to capitalize the development of the body of work required in that area. And so Senator Monroe tonight has outlined the consultations that have undertaken. But you know, Madam Deputy President, I hold town halls with my industry on a quarterly basis. We work through the various Renewable Energy Association, the Chamber of Commerce, Green Council, and so on. And we have these consultations, we have them virtually, we have them in person, but 100% you can guarantee that there's always going to be somebody or some bodies who will come and say they weren't consulted or they were not a part of the process. You kind of can't get away from that. That's always going to be the case. But that is not to say that, as Senator Monroe Knight has said, that there have not been consultations with the stakeholders. And the Marine Spatial Plan, interestingly, even on the website, it does say to people, if you are in a number of categories, if you are in the coastal communities, Senator Drake talked about coastal areas, if you are coastal planners or professionals, if you are civil society actors sitting outside of government, if you are a member of the cultural heritage community, if you are emergency or disaster management, energy, my guys, enforcement, environmental and biodiversity management, Senator Drake's guys, fisheries, all of our guys, general public, government, yes, maritime transport, meteorology, the private sector, regulatory agencies and departments, tourism and recreational activities, vendors, vulnerable groups, including members of the disabled community and religious groups, and water sport operators, and the list goes on. And the website, it says, we want to hear from you. In an instance, in the same town hall that we had on energy a few weeks ago, there was someone who said they were making comments on a recent decision by the Fair Trading Commission. And I remember saying to them, but why are you making a comment here now when this matter was open for public consultation under the law for 3 weeks? Did you use the opportunity there? But you will always have persons who do not take advantage or who are not present at the moment where the consultations are taking place, or any of the multiple moments who will come afterwards and say that they were not consulted. That is not to cast aspersions on the quality of consultations at all when the majority of persons have been engaged. Now, in terms of the development pathway for the Bridgetown Port, no, the legislation does not change what currently exists. On land or at sea, there's always a regulatory requirement that must be observed. The planning department always must give planning approval for any kind of construction, and that is still the requirement, whether it is at land or at sea. And I believe the Honourable Prime Minister has spoken more than once too on even the reconstruction of the fishing harbour in Bridgetown, and the environmental work that has to be undertaken. And we talked about Baird. They have been coastal engineers working with Barbados for the longest time. The environmental impact assessment, all of the development work must be done, and that has to be undertaken before any work can be started. And I believe that the Prime Minister has made it clear that the length of time that it will take to rebuild that harbour is driven heavily by the coastal environmental work that has to be undertaken by the international coastal engineers. So that doesn't change the approval process that has long been established in Barbados, and I would not want that to run down the road at all either. And so CZMU, now to be the authority and planning, and the international coastal partners are all meant to be a part of the process. I believe when I rose on a point of order on pre-clearance, this is long-standing. Madam President, Barbados has said, I was the Minister of Tourism and International Transport at the time when we started these consultations. The current Minister of Tourism and International Transport has gone very far down the road with continuing to have these conversations, both with respect to the GAIA and the Seaport. If Barbados, like Aruba, like Bahamas, like 4 or 5 cities in Canada, like if you were, let's see, you can apply, you can have also, let me pull it back up, in Dublin, in Ireland, in Canada, you have it at Calgary, Toronto, Edmonton, Halifax, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, Victoria, Winnipeg. All of these airports, Madam Deputy President, have the ability to have pre-clearance. So you clear, their officials are based in their country, and so you move, and we've experienced it when we travel internationally, you move from the general area into the airport, and you enter a designated area, which is considered U.S. Customs. And it is considered U.S. Customs, their officials are on site, they clear you on site, they clear your cargo, your baggage, everything there on site, and then you proceed into a sterile area to enter the United States, having already received TSA clearance. And when you enter the United States, you have already been landed or considered to be landed in the country. When I started to talk about Barbados having ambitions and vision, Madam Deputy President, why would Barbados not want to make sure that we have the ability to move seamlessly from one place to the other by having pre-clearance capabilities? They do not override the local authority of a given country. And if you remember, I think we have to always remember our history. We have to remember that we are the country that when other countries wanted to have a ship rider agreement in the 1990s, Barbados said no. Our territorial integrity and our sovereignty is never up for sale. This is still the country that when there were Article 99 agreements being discussed on the Rome Statute for International Criminal Court, Barbados said no. Our territorial integrity and our sovereignty has never been up for sale. So why would it raise a red flag that Barbados would have a dedicated entity? As a matter of fact, every single embassy or high commission in this country is considered the territory of the sending state. There's nothing different about it here. And so in the context of an airport or a seaport, a pre-clearance facility is nothing different than what would apply in the case of what would be common premises for a foreign entity based there to arrange to clear passengers and immigration and persons who are coming into their country in an overseas jurisdiction. There's nothing unusual or spurious about it at all. It is accepted international best practice. So I take the point about, and I will share with the honourable members, honourable minister with responsibility for the Seaport, as well as the honourable minister with responsibility for the broader issues raised by Senator Drakes on sustainable fisheries. I believe that Senator Monroe Knight would have comprehensively covered the issues on fisheries last week in that debate, and I accept that Senator Drakes was not here, neither was I, and so I would not attempt to relitigate or re-debate a bill that went last week. So I'm focusing today on the bill that is actually before the Honourable Chamber, which is on the Seaport. But I hope that I have brought clarity to the broader questions of the interrelationships with agencies around the Coastal Zone Management Unit, soon to be authority, the existing relationships which have always been the case with approvals for planning and CZMU, and the work of the Bridgetown Port, which has continued both locally, and I see in the legislation, for example, you will find the Bridgetown Port has a master plan and a business plan. That has always been the case. The master plan is usually a 10-year master plan. The business plan is a 5-year master plan. But in this legislation, it also allows for those things to be reviewed on an as-needed basis. And so, Madam Deputy President, I want to again commend this bill to this honourable chamber. I hope that I have responded to the queries that have been raised by the honourable member, and I expect that upon completion in 2027, of the Marine Spatial Plan, that they will then be in a position to do the following things as asked for by the honourable member. Legally declare the ocean space, 30% of the ocean space as protected biodiversity zones by that time, to apply sustainability practices to the remaining ocean space by using adaptive zoning methodologies, and to support environmental stewardship engagement by 2028. The expectation also is that we will be in a position to establish partnerships and internships for innovation, technology use, and entrepreneurship, and to engage the diverse stakeholders to promote sociocultural and economic development. And then finally, I want to also draw to the Honourable Chamber's attention that it is the intention by 2027 also to identify a number of priority areas for short-term area use, and to build a qualified cadre to manage these priorities within the first 5 years of implementation. This is a solid bill before the Honourable Chamber. It is rooted in solid policies, Madam Deputy President. It is rooted in a solid vision, and it is rooted in an implementation plan that has been very well articulated and defined both in the legislation and in the broader policy framework. And with these few words, I beg to move that this bill is read a second time.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy President, I'd like to revert to public business and ask for the temporary appointment of the Honourable Lindell Nurse, and the Honourable Lindell Nurse as the Acting Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Senator Lindell Nurse be now appointed as the acting president for the remainder of today's sitting. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that you do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chamber and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Senate is now in committee.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 4.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 and 6.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 and 6 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 and 6 do stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, Clauses 7 through 13 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 3, Clauses 7 through 13 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, Clauses 14 through 29 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 4, Clauses 14 through to 29 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, Clauses 30 to 32 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, Clauses 30 through 32 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 33
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that.
38.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, Clauses 33 through 38 do stand part. However, Mr. Chair, there is an amendment at Clause 35, and I beg to move that the word home porting be removed and let the sentence would just read requirements for vessels.
Clause 36.
30, no.
Clause 36.
It's actually Clause 36, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that the word home porting at Clause 36 be removed. The caption under 36 is entry for provisioning arrangements, and it is made available to all vessels and not just home porting vessels.
The question is that Parts 5, Part 6,
36.
Clauses 35 to 38
36 has an amendment.
do now stand or
As amended.
as amended. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 7, Clauses 39 through 46 do now stand part.
Do you want me to repeat? The question is that Part 7, Clauses 39 through 46 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 47 through 50.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, Clauses 47 through 50 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 8, Clauses 47 to 50 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 51 to 54.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 9, Clauses 51 through 54 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, Clauses 51 through to 54 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 55 to 65.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 10, Clauses 55 through 65 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 10, Clauses 55 through to 65 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 66 to 70.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 11, Clauses 66 to 70 stand part.
The question is that Part 11, Clauses 66 through to 70 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 71 to 73.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 12, Clauses 71 to 73 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 12, Clauses 71 to 73 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 74 to 94.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 13, Clauses 74 to 94 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 13, Clauses 74 through to 94 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The first schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The third schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The fourth schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The fifth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fifth schedule now be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The sixth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to Her Honour the Acting President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now inform Her Honour the Acting President of the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Madam Acting President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Seaport Industry Management Operations and Development Act of 2025.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Seaport Industry Management Operations and Development Act 2025. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Number 9. Order number 9 in the name of the Honourable Leader of Senator, which has been assigned to Senator the Honourable Dr. Monroe Knight to move the second reading of the Barbados National Honours and Decorations Amendment Bill 2025.
Thank you very much.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for recognizing me. Mr. President, Madam President, I'm very delighted to lead debate on this amendment. So this amendment, Madam President, I don't believe should be contentious. It seeks to amend the Barbados National Honours and Decorations Act 2021, which of course would have come into force as we became a parliamentary republic, and established different categories for the awards of Barbadians in various aspects for their contribution to various areas of national development. But primarily that act, like I said, was about rewarding individuals. And you would have seen over time, over the years, that we would have honoured such Barbadians. In particular, Madam President, we would have noted the introduction of the humanitarian awards, particularly given around COVID, to those workers who would have performed yeoman service, and then that the government would have sought to award by making sure that there was some level of gravitas and national status given to them. It provided for the Order of the Freedom of Barbados, which is the highest award, and we would have known as well, Madam President, that even around COVID, we would have sought to give honorary Order of Freedom Awards of Barbados, again, to people who would have helped and assisted Barbados in our time of need. So that we have the establishment of this system through legislation of national honours and decorations. This amendment today, however, seeks to go further. It moves not just to recognise individuals who have provided that level of service, but the amendment also now expands to the naming or renaming of public buildings, public roads, and public spaces, also to be considered as a national honour. And I believe, Madam President, again, there are many areas and roads across Barbados that you would hear Barbadians saying or suggesting should be elevated to that national status. For instance, Farley Hill Park. Madam President, within the Division of Culture, we have the Register of Historic Places. And under that register, we sought to find out from Barbadians, so we have researchers from UWI who go into certain communities and ask those communities, what are those historic areas and people and buildings within the various communities. And Farley Hill emerged as one of those areas in which people are saying, we want to have Farley Hill seen as a national park and be given that national status. Madam President, there are across Barbados, again, many roads that don't have names. I hear that as a complaint coming from some residents as well. I remember in a particular area, Madam President, in Maxwell, traversing that area, and there was a fairly short road, but you would have, Madam President, in that short road, about 7 houses, and all 7 houses are part of one single family. And I remember, Madam President, as I was walking through the areas, that the residents were advocating, well, why can't we have this particular road named after the family? All of the households on that road were extensions. And so this process would allow then for Barbadians to make nominations to the Advisory Council in order to have such places, public roads, like I said before, and public buildings now also be considered as national honors. And Madam President, I want to suggest that this change as well that is represented within these amendments are also as well part of government's larger frame to imbue greater transparency and greater public involvement. We're talking about stakeholder involvement and people having a say in the entire governance framework. And you would see that this government has continually, Madam President, had that agenda at the forefront. We saw it in relation to the selection, the appointment of judges, Madam President, us ushering a completely new system of appointment of judges. We saw, Madam President, again, with the election of our president, Madam President, by Parliament, and so that there is a continual effort, Madam President, to ensure that people can participate. Now, I talked about that national register that we have in the Division of Culture. What would normally happen, again, in some instances, I would say my committee would come, they would come and they would say to me, well, Minister, we have all of these places that people have nominated, we've done some research, and we want to put forward. And we prepare a cabinet paper, it goes to cabinet, cabinet agrees, and therefore that would give effect. So that the decision then would have been, again, through cabinet. This process opens it up now for the public. And you would note, Madam President, that again, traditionally, when we have the awards process under the original act, that you would see ads coming out of the paper for people to be able to nominate persons. And in that similar fashion, you would see the public being able then to make nominations as well in respect of this. And again, Madam President, this should not be a partisan issue because, again, both governments all along have traditionally done it. You see this in the David Thompson Polyclinic, Madam President. You will see recently we had the opening of the new legal and judicial complex, Sir Henry Ford, God rest his soul, and to David Simmons as well. And there are multiple examples, Madam President. But again, moving away from a system in which that authority now just rests only within the sphere of cabinet and within the sphere of ministers, to be able to say that the public now can now be involved in making nominations, and they would make those nominations to an advisory council. That advisory council was established under the primary legislation, and then has now the ability then to make recommendations to the Prime Minister for the awards as well. The amendment as well also makes provision for national honors to be conferred on the holders of the office of the Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defence Force and the Commissioner of Police of the Barbados Service as well, the Barbados Police Service. These men and possibly women that make an indelible contribution as well to, I say possibly because, right, male dominated, but that will change. That will change. Men and women who make, because it says it's for the Chief of Staff. I don't know that we've had a female Chief of Staff. We don't yet have a female Commissioner of Police, otherwise said, possibly to be conferred as well. Who make indelible contribution and sacrifices. And now the legislation makes provision that they be conferred, Madam President, with national honors. And it also indicates as well that the holder shall continue to be a member of the order, notwithstanding demission or retirement from office. Because very often, when they leave and demit, their title and status that is taken away from them. Under this amendment, it says, Madam President, that that title will go with them. Again, recognizing the contribution that these persons would make over the lifespan of their career. And I think that this is a significant amendment for these persons as well. It also notes, Madam President, this is extremely important, that, and this is part of the consequential amendment, that it made provision for the Prime Minister of Barbados to be a member of the order. It says that the Order of the Freedom of Barbados shall be conferred on each Prime Minister upon completion of his, that perhaps be his or her, first term of office. The Prime Minister shall continue to be a member of the order, notwithstanding demission or retirement from office. But importantly, and this is extremely important, it says the section shall not apply. Madam President, I want to repeat. This section shall not apply to the holder of the post of the Prime Minister at the time of commencement of this section. It says that because there are those that would want to suggest that the current Prime Minister, the current government is setting up this amendment so that we can confer on our leader, somebody, I'm hearing it aside saying self-aggrandizement, some level of national order. Our Prime Minister, I want to say, has been very belligerent. Absolutely. Looked across the table at all of us in cabinet and let us know, do not even try it. In Beijing parlance, when a person said, I want it, and if I'm going to try it, I can refuse it and embarrass all of you. Or she told me so in cabinet. She did not want it. But it is a recognition, though, that Prime Ministers that serve, again, when they demit office, again, do so and become ordinary citizens. Sometimes we refer to them as former Prime Minister, sometimes not. And therefore, in this amendment, it makes sure that they will have a dignified status conferred in law, even if they demit and retire. And that is important, and is also as well, Madam President, conferred on the Chief Justice of Barbados as well. Importantly, another part of the consequential amendment speaks to the award of the Pride of Barbados. Now, under the original legislation, this Pride of Barbados is only given to, I think it's 10 per parish. But unfortunately, I believe that when that was first configured, it did not take into consideration the different sizes, the populations of some parishes. So you can have a parish, for instance, like say a St. John, and then you can have a parish like St. Michael. So you're going to give St. John 10 and give St. Michael 10. You will give St. Joseph 10 and give Christ Church 10 as well. What this amendment does, it moves away for that number of 10 because there will be changes in populations over time. So as opposed to prescribing a set number, it opens the way that the minister with responsibility therefore can confer. Because again, for population growth, other dynamics, there may be boundary changes, there may be so many things that might happen in relation to the assignment of those awards. Again, and to ensure that we have fairness, Madam President, fairness in the conferment of the Pride of Barbados Award. The bill as well also allows for the Prime Minister to confer national honors and decorations in certain circumstances, and it actually identifies those certain circumstances. Madam President, I spoke before to when we had the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that we conferred honorary Order of Freedom of Barbados Awards. We did so, again, as I said before, on the Clarissa Etienne, the former head of PAHO, God rest her soul. We did so as well to the Prime Minister of India for their sterling contribution. Now, again, ordinary Barbadians may not understand their contribution because that relationship would have been with the government in terms of how they would have assisted the government. So that this provision allows for the Prime Minister and the government to be able then to identify and to award those persons that would have provided at that level of assistance. And again, the amendment actually, again, just to be very clear, actually identifies, it says for the purposes of subsection 1, extraordinary national circumstances includes natural disasters or national emergencies, major international achievements or events where Barbados' reputation is significantly advanced, extraordinary efforts in national development projects or public service, especially after difficult circumstances, or acts of heroism or contribution to the welfare of that nation as well. So that it identifies, again, some of the circumstances in which the Prime Minister may confer on any honour or decoration under the Act, which could be, again, on dissolution of Parliament, and again, those extraordinary national circumstances. Madam President, those are the amendments that have been made. This is not an exhaustive, I believe and hope, not an exhaustive debate because the National Honours and Decorations Act would have just been passed in 2021. And these simple amendments, as I said before, are really one to ensure that the public now can participate, but also as well to give status, to give dignified honour to a particular post within the government service for people, again, who provide extraordinary service and who we want to make sure that the government, that the whole of Barbados can recognize their significant contribution. And with those few words, Madam President, I'm obliged and I beg that this bill be read a second time.
Senator Malalou, please.
Thank you, Madam Acting President. I had not prepared comments on this, what was described as a very mundane couple of amendments, but I do have a question which I hope could be answered. In the Honourable Senator's presentation, was at pains to explain that the object of this in many respects was to move away from just the cabinet and also add the public into this and to add this advisory council. And I'm a little confused because when I read 21B section 1, while I do understand point C, and I think there's a D after that one, which the Honourable Senator just explained to us, I am confused and I would like to understand how that reconciles with this amendment which allows, upon the dissolution of Parliament, for the Prime Minister or the then former Prime Minister on their own accord, without any consultation, to award an honour or decoration. So I'm not clear as to what is the reason for that, because items A and B, so it's just a simple question, Madam Acting President. What is the need for us to have a situation where an outgoing Prime Minister, either by the dissolution of Parliament or, in section B, upon the notice to the President of the resignation of the Prime Minister, why are we now creating the opportunity for that individual to confer honours or decorations without consultation to the public or the advisory council? The two things seem to be at odds with each other, but perhaps, Madam Deputy President, I am misunderstanding, and therefore I pose it as a question to the Honourable Senator to perhaps help me to better understand what is the purpose of clauses 21B, section 1A and B? And with that question, I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Senator Andwele Boyce.
Thank you for recognizing me, Madam Deputy President. I stand in support of this legislation, this amendment, because I think it represents, no doubt, an important moment in Barbados's development. And while it may appear a simple amendment, I think it entrenches democracy and expands democracy and presents an opportunity for the country to, as it journeys early on in this journey of becoming a republic, to consider, what we call ourselves, what places are called, and whose stories we elevate to national prominence. I have to tell no one, I don't have to tell anyone in this chamber, that Barbados has had a colonial past, and that if you make your way across this country, there are many places, names of places that reflect that past. And I think it is up to this generation of Barbadian to right the wrongs where they exist and to examine the extent to which we need to hold on to, certainly in my view in many instances, I think it is time that we move away from. Many of those names and much of that nomenclature that is reminiscent and reflective of a very dark past in this country. So that I say that the amendment before the chamber is a part of decolonization and decoloniality. Madam Deputy President, because it presents the opportunity for the ordinary Barbadian to advance the notion that there are Barbadians like themselves, who look like them, who have made a contribution to the development of this country, and who are deserving of the places in this country being named after them. Additionally, no doubt I think that as we move towards renaming places in this country, as the advisory committee takes recommendations, the other thing is that we have to tell the stories of the individuals that we try to elevate in this way. The historical experience, Madam President, is that we from time to time change the name of a place, the name of a building, and I don't know that we do a sufficiently good job of telling the stories of the individuals whose names stand in those places or on those buildings. And I think it's part of a broader culture, no doubt, because we have an oral culture in this country, and we don't publish, we don't share the written story as much as we should, and certainly for prosperity's sake, certainly for the future education and edification of Barbadians, Madam Deputy President, we should ensure that when we change the name of a place, when we erect or when we rename a building, that we engage in the robust activity of communicating who that person is and what their contribution has been to the country, because I think it makes a difference. So Madam Deputy President, I don't intend to be long, but just to say that this is an important step and that I wish to see others in that process, as I indicated, that process of decolonialization, that process of righting the wrongs, that process of elevating Barbadians in the country of their birth to their proper station when they duly deserve. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you, Madam Acting President, for recognizing me and allowing me to speak on this amendment. I believe strongly that every country in this world has a plan or had plans to honor their citizens. And why is this so? Because in honoring citizens, these citizens have a story that connects generations, and a story that every person in any particular citizenry should know. I agree, Madam, that the present system of honoring individuals could be very subjective, no matter how objective the persons as they are now appear to be. It could be subjective. And I agree that any attempt to democratize this election augurs well for a country. I believe in objectivity, even from my own study in history, in theology, although you don't get much of that in theology. But let me say something that stunned me last week. It was last week, I think it was. When this legislation was brought before the House, and I like to speak very frankly on these things, the leader of the opposition said that this reflected monarchy. It didn't reflect anything about a republic. I was taken aback, Madam, because in fact, I could not believe my ears. Because here is a person who cannot let the initials SC reflect behind his name, but finds great solace in maintaining KC. But yet you want to chastise a government that brings this piece of legislation. You want to chastise the government and say you can't really go along with it because it does not reflect monarchy. Sorry, it does not reflect republic, it reflects monarchy. And let me say this, sir. I have noticed, sorry, Madam, I'm so sorry. I have noticed that within the past week or so, I've noticed that we have been dealing with some important legislation. And the same opposition is absenting itself from these discussions. Yet, you see yourselves as offering alternatives to the perceived woes that are in Barbados. But you do not want to take part in these discussions of national interest. So I am totally behind this, Madam. Why am I behind it? Because I've read philosophers after philosopher. Bernard Williams, Alexis Tocqueville, even the Jewish rabbi, Jonathan Sachs. And all of these persons believe in the honoring of citizens because each of these citizens has a story that is relevant for the advancement of society. Even the book of Ecclesiasticus in the Apocrypha in the Bible, these were those who wrote these, for those who do not know, those who wrote the books of the Apocrypha were Jewish writers. And these are here, sir, because of part of this story. And what did they say? Let us now praise famous men. Famous men, come on. Our ancestors. You see, people believe that when they say famous men, if I sound like a preacher, maybe I'm not doing it. But when they said famous men, come on, the come is there. Praise also our ancestors. And they gave a list. Ben Sirach gave a list of persons who need to be honored. But the writer also noticed that there were some who were not so famous, but those who had made their contributions to societies, they too should be honored and they should be praised. Why? Because such people have a story. And what is it that keeps a story going, the country going? I believe, madam, that because there is a story to be told. And I believe for any society to maintain, and I'm going to use some words here from a speech given in London by a gentleman called Charles Morrison on emancipation. Black History Month, you see. Parts of it, excerpts from it. I'm not quoting, I'm just going to refer to them. But for any society to maintain...
Honourable Senator, you know that it is my position that when people are quoting or citing documents, even if they are the author, that I need detail. So if this person, Charles Morris, gave a speech, you have to tell me where and when, and cite something that we can reference it for accuracy and have it as a proper part of the records of this House. Yes, lest you misquote, misrepresent, or in other ways injure the name or reputation of Charles Morris.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. I will concur with your ruling, and I can make it a document of the House. But it was given as an address in London in 2022, I think it was, on Black History Month. But for a society to maintain its freedom, that society must pass on the story of its people, as Senator Boyce just mentioned. And I believe that this is the most important aspect of it. That when you put a building and put a name on it, you ask the question, who was so-and-so? If you have a building, let's say Robin Fenty on it, you ask the question, who is Robin Fenty? The only thing that should, you should say more. You should say more than that she was taught by a fellow called Charles Morris. That's the point I wanted to make. But we have a story to tell. We have the monuments of Bassa. Men and women on the slave plantation who struggled for freedom from the horrors of plantation slavery. We must tell the story of the early political leaders We must tell the story of those who struggle in this life, right? So that that story can be added to the history of this country. That is why we must tell the story. That they can pass on the story to their children and their children's children. But I must say that when we do such honor, sir, the parents too must play a role in passing on their story to the people. I remember going to Bridgetown for the first time, and I saw this statue there that is now gone, statue of Lord Nelson. And I asked my grandmother, what is that, who is he? And she gave me a beautiful story of this man who fought, and he lost one eye, he lost a foot, he lost a hand, but he still continued to fight it. And that generated my interest in history. Only to recognize that this man never even fought for Barbados, not even defended Barbados. Okay? But passing on a story in a people, by a people, of a people, if we do not pass on these stories, our future is blurred. Why? Because a person without a story, a person without a past, has no identity. That is what we are doing here, reinforcing the identity of Barbadians. And I want to quote from, or refer, not quote, to some words of Jonathan Sachs. It is in a book, he wrote these words that I'm referring to, not quoting, in the book, To Heal a Fractured World. And he was making the point that the story of the founders, the journey they made, the obstacles they had to overcome, and the vision that drove them are essential elements of a covenantal culture. And we in Barbados now pride ourselves of having a covenant of hope, a covenant of hope, and that makes the story even more relevant. Too many of our people are leaving this life and we do not know the contributions they made. We must retell stories. And we can retell these stories by honoring these people. Why? Because we must never forget who we are and from whence have we come. We must tell the story of why those persons existed and why we exist. Because we do not want Barbadians to lose their identity. When we honor these people, and as I think Senator Boyd said, you put some writing there on them. That gives us identity. We do not want to be fluttering as a chick without its heads. Let me say to you, sir, to you, madam, that again, there are many of us who said that we are a Christian society. I don't agree with that. But if we have to take note of that, the point is that the Christian story continues. It continues. And people continue to add to it. Luke added to it. The apostles added to it. All of these people we seek to honor today, that we would honor in the future, they can be added to that story, added to this history of this country. So that at some point, people would come to realize, look, this is who I am. This is who so-and-so was. And they have contributed to my development. And madam, I want to say with those few words, I totally support this amendment.
Senator Dr. Monroe Knight.
Thank you, Madam President, and let me thank all of the honourable senators that have contributed to the debate. Madam President, I did not want to rise to my feet when Senator Malalu was speaking, but I just want to make sure that I correct the record, that I did not indicate that the discussion or the amendment was in any way mundane. I actually think it is extremely fundamental. For me, like I said, I don't think it was. It should be treated in a partisan way, or that it should be overly contentious, but certainly not that this amendment is mundane. Similar to what Senator Boyce would have indicated and I would have suggested, this is really should be seen in the context of government efforts to broaden transparency and to broaden the involvement of the society as well in the process. I also want to point out that we're not establishing the advisory council in this legislation. It was in this amendment, sorry. It is already established in the primary legislation. What we're doing now is adding to the things that it can seek take nominations for, which is in relation, as I would have pointed out, to the buildings, the public spaces, and the public roads. So we're not establishing it here. I do want to say, Madam President, that I did check on the composition of this council and noted that there is provision for a member of the opposition, which to date has not been filled. The opposition has not identified anyone to sit on the council. Madam President, there's no representatives here in the chamber at the moment from the opposition. So I would not want to belabor the point, since they cannot speak for themselves, as they have chosen not to be in the chamber to speak for themselves on this particular bill, but to indicate that there is provision on the advisory council for such representation. In respect of the question raised about the Prime Minister's power to be able to confer honours upon dissolution and upon the notice of resignation. Now, Madam President, as you would know, there's a need perhaps to give outgoing Prime Ministers an opportunity to be able to nominate persons who, again, like I said before, may have been missed by the public, but have made critical contributions. Right outside this Honourable Senate, we have the committee room that is named after the first woman parliamentarian, Ermitude Edna Bourne, that was here, and that was conferred by the Prime Minister. So that we are seeking to be able to ensure that we make space for a Prime Minister who would understand that there are some others as well who have made significant contributions to the entire political landscape, again, that the public themselves may not have seen, because the public interface and knowledge and understanding may not be as fulsome, but which there can be some consensus in relation to this, so that it brings balance to the space and allows for the public consultation, but allows as well for the Prime Minister as well to also as well have some input. I just want to as well speak to the contributions that were made by Senator Morris and Senator Boyce, retelling the stories, and I could not agree more. The season of emancipation is essentially about that, the telling of those stories. Madam President, just a few weeks ago, we would have launched a radio series looking at the untold stories of our parents that would have been able to help build Barbados, that would have been part of the liberation struggle, in as much as we speak only to men. We launched it on April 14th when we were acknowledging the anniversary of the Bassa Rebellion, noting that, well, again, we speak to Bassa, there was also as well Nanny Gregg that we speak to, but we don't necessarily elevate or understand her story. So within the Division of Culture, we undertook historical research looking at how women across Barbados have participated in the resistance movement, and we now have a full radio series seeking to tell the stories of those women. Madam President, under, as I spoke before, the National Register of Historic Places and persons that I spoke to that is also under the Division of Culture. The intent is that we establish QR codes that would have historical information, Madam President, about those persons and about those places. So as the Honourable Senators, both of them would have spoken to, you would be able to hear and understand more of the stories, more about the persons and their contribution than just a name, but as well acknowledging that we have already been doing it. The renaming of the bus terminal, Madam President, in the name of Granville Williams as well was significant. A leader, a religious leader, as well that led a movement that was also seen and associated with, we talked about decolonization and resistance within Barbados. So there has been an ongoing move, Madam President, to make sure that we do so, that we bring the stories to light, that we can rename and name buildings in our own likeness. I believe we talked about, somebody talked about Rihanna. We have Rihanna Drive as well, a national hero. Samuel Jackman Prescott as well, so that there is an effort to make sure that we tell those stories. And again, this amendment contributes to that, grounds it within legislation. Madam Chair, with those few words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam President, I beg to move that your honour do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Senate is in committee.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 do stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 4 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 5 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 5 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 6 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 6 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that clause 7 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 7 do now stand part. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The schedule.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to Madam Chair the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to Her Honour, the Acting President, the passing of one bill in committee. Will all those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Madam President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. The question is, all honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Barbados National Honours and Decorations Amendment Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados National Honours and Decorations Act 2025. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. We revert now to messages, and please, would the Honourable Senator take note that a message will go from the Honourable the Senate to the Honourable the House of Assembly, indicating an amendment made today, Wednesday, 30th April, to the Seaport Industry Management Operations and Development Bill 2025, amended as follows: that clause 36, in clause 36, the word home porting appearing before the word vessels was deleted. This notice of amendment will be transmitted to the Honourable the House of Assembly, inviting the Honourable House's concurrence in the amendments as stated.
This brings us to the end of government's business for today. And I want to thank the honourable members who are here, and I beg to move that the Senate is adjourned sine die.
The question is that the Senate be now adjourned sine die. All honourable senators in favour please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. The Honourable the Senate is now adjourned sine die.